All right, welcome back to ESO 10 Fest Day 6, which is all about story. And in a very exciting story twist, we are joined by Bill Slavicsek, narrative director and lead writer for The Elder Scrolls Online. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for your time today, especially on the weekend. Everybody, let's hear it for Bill. Woohoo! You've definitely unlocked hero status just for the fact that you're here. But I have a feeling that status is only going to rise as our viewers begin to understand what you've been responsible for over the years. But let's start.
Sure.
Let's start simple. What is your current role at ZOS? For example, what you have been working on the last couple of weeks.
My current role is I am the project narrative director for Elder Scrolls Online. That means I'm in charge of the writers and I oversee all of our story development. And basically anything that's player-facing text, me or someone on my team checks it out before it goes public. So that's what we do in general. Right now we're working on what we call VO lock, which is our last process before we pull scripts for the audio, me or someone, the voice actors. For the package that will be coming out. When is this coming out?
End of the year?
End of the year, yeah, end of the year. So we're working on that right now. So I'm actually working this weekend, so this isn't that big. This is a break from that.
All right, hero status revoked. That's
all good, all good.
So if there are words involved, either spoken or written, there's a good chance it's passed across your desk, correct?
My desk or somebody on my team, yes.
Right, now, we will come back to all of this and what you've been working on more recently, but for now, let's go way back in time. We got to talk about this, because, unbeknownst to many here, you've had such an impact, not only on ESO, but on gaming in general. Not just video games, but pen and paper-based RPGs as well. And the rule sets, this sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of video games and how they interpret that sort of RPG playstyle, that approach. Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind. I know it's a long history, but if you can give us a quick whistle-stop tour, you've done some amazing stuff, and I'd love for people to hear about it.
Sure. I started at West End Games, where I was editor and game designer. Eventually, I worked on the Star Wars role-playing game and helped. Back then, there was just the movies. There was nothing else. It wasn't. We didn't have the internet and all of that kind of stuff. So when we made the Star Wars role-playing game, I needed to create a bunch of stuff. And after Lucasfilm hemmed and hawed, they finally said, "Yeah, go ahead, do what you need to do." And so now, even today, a lot of the things that we created back in the day for West End Games are still being used and influencing Star Wars today. The whole story in Andor was taken out of our Rebel sourcebook that we put together, and a lot of the aliens, I named them because they used to have names like Squidhead and Hammerhead, which were just really insults to me. So I gave them real names like Athorian and Quarren and stuff like that. But that's where I started. I eventually went to TSR to work on Dungeons and Dragons. When we went to Wizards of the Coast, I became the R&D director for Dungeons and Dragons, and I led the creative effort of D&D for 14 years, from end of 2nd edition through 3rd edition, 4th editions, and the very beginnings of 5th edition before I came to Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah, so people in chat are beginning to get a sense. I mean,
Mo was saying I used to play the Star Wars tabletop game when I was a kid with a group of friends. Look at that.
Yeah, there we go. Continuity. But yeah, people are beginning to get a sense, if they didn't already, of the breadth of experience. And it's so interesting. You were involved in a panel along with Lawrence Schick and a couple of the others in Amsterdam talking about this. It was absolutely fascinating. I was there with one of our officers in the guild, Eggbirds, who's a huge D&D nut, and his face, man, he was just geeking out. It was great. But so yeah, the fact that you named aliens, like, instead of the Greedo alien, you named Rodian and Twi'lek and all of these things. That's you.
It's me.
Just amazing. I love that.
Such a great claim to fame. But so we do have a lot of big D&D fans here in the ESO community, as you would expect. But for those who haven't played a ton of pen and paper RPGs, I want to stress that West End, TSR, and obviously Wizards of the Coast are absolutely foundational. So for an RPG designer and writer, these credentials are pretty much unbeatable. What are the things you've learned from pen and paper RPGs that you think are most applicable to a video game like ESO?
Even the way we build stories and quests are very similar, because like in a paper game, we don't write from the protagonist's point of view, and even for a video game, we don't write the player, we write everything around the player. So a lot of that experience translated very easily. The fact that most of my career was working on something that was medieval fantasy, of a different flavor, but still in that same vein also helped. And so much of what the computer games, the video games use, as you said earlier, as their foundational mechanical elements are drawn right out of the tabletop, the original D&D game, right? That was the place that started it all, and we still use hit points and armor class and similar concepts to this very day.
So you first joined ZOS back in 2012?
Yep, I started the first day of the new year in 2012. I ran into Zeb Cook at the GDC that summer before, right after I had left Wizards of the Coast. We got to talking. He called me out to Maryland for an interview, and shortly thereafter, they hired me to be part of the writing team. There's only a couple of us back then when we started, me and Zenki and Lawrence, Tracy. I think that was it. That was the three of us, and Lawrence were the original writers when I got there.
That's incredible. I love that. Again, I've said that sort of every day, that I love the fact that, you guys have been there from the start. And it means that obviously it's a nice place to work, but you've created this thing from the ground up, and that's very impressive. But back then Skyrim was still pretty new. The OG Dark Souls was just getting its first expansion. The first Dishonored came out. Guild Wars 2 was launching. A lot has happened since then. So how do you get involved, and where were your earliest responsibilities?
Oh, like I said, I got involved because I knew Zeb Cook from my TSR days, and he brought me aboard. Then my first responsibilities was just learning what was there, and then shortly after we got started, we changed everything thanks to the influence of Skyrim, and we changed the way we were building the game, and decided to get rid of all of the what do you call it? We were not a VO game initially, so we got rid of all of the walls of text, as I like to call them, and rewrote the game to be totally voiced, which is very different. So that was an interesting experience to figure out how to do that and what that meant for our game. My initial responsibilities, I wrote about a third of the launch game.
Wow.
What came out for the launch game. So I did things like Glenumbra, Zone, everything in Glenumbra, everything in East March, everything in Deshaun, everything in Rivenspire, everything in Cold Harbor. There was some other stuff, but those were the big chunks that I was responsible for.
So Darian, Emmerich, these are your guys.
Darian, Nariu, Cadwell, Rigat the Brash, Lady Laurent and Stibbins. Those guys.
A lot of favorites in that list.
Scordo, Lyrinth, yeah.
All of those are amazing. Oh, that's so fun.
And not just me, I worked with my designers for each of those characters. Very much a team effort, but yes, I was the primary writer for all that stuff initially.
Amazing. So were you already a fan of the Elder Scrolls series?
I was. I played Morrowind to death when it came out. A little bit of Oblivion. And then when I was hired, I was already hired by the time Skyrim showed up. So we were working on our game, and we
Yeah.
just used Skyrim to kind of inspire us into what we were doing. But I played all kinds of video games besides, and board games and role-playing games. I mean, I was a big gamer when I got into gaming as a career, and I still am today. So
It helps.
So when the gaming media does tier lists of MMOs, ESO tends to be categorized under best story-rich MMO, alongside, I guess, The Old Republic is another one that you often see broken down like that, or story-focused MMO. That's got to make you happy, right? That the thing that you're so intimately connected to is one of the defining features, or is seen by the media, at least, as one of the defining features of the game.
yeah, I mean, how could it not? We've been proud of the way we tell our stories since the beginning. Once we figured out what we were doing, we said, hey, we got something special here. Let's lean into it. And I think we've just gotten better at it over time. One of the things I love about working on ESO is that we can craft these deep, rich stories in a medium that's not typically known for that. And I think we do a good job.
Well, you definitely do. Yes, I'm not really an MMO player. That's not really my thing. I love story. You know, it has to be interesting for me, and yeah, that's why I'm still here. 10 years later. So you're definitely doing a great job.
Yeah, you're not the only ones who feel that way. That's for sure. The combat is something that I talk about a lot as a thing that is much, in my opinion, far superior in this game to a lot of MMOs. I think that's definitely fair. But the story thing is also clearly true. And it's an unambiguous compliment to the way it's written. And why do you think
the way we approach the storytelling? We don't treat it as strictly MMO storytelling. We treat every PvE quest as though it were a single player game. That's how we write it. That's how we approach the story. And then we go in and make adjustments for multiplayer because that is an aspect of the game, but that's not what we are focusing on when we're trying to tell the stories. We're just trying to tell good stories. And I think that's just the way our approach helps us do that. And then beyond that, we add on to that interesting and compelling characters, because without that, I don't think we have a good story, especially since we tell our story through voice, which means through characters.
Yeah, I found that a lot. The ones that stay with me, it's often because they are grounded or centered around a character that I found particularly engaging. Even if they're not that crucial to the plot, the fact that they are there as a presence throughout the story, it can make a huge difference.
I also love the fact we were just in Shipwright's Regret, which is one of the examples of, if you've done other quests, Zaji knows you, or Zaji has a different outfit, and how perhaps people don't notice it necessarily. But these details, to me, it makes me really feel part of it, which I feel like sometimes in a game when the story is just sort of not really the important thing, you don't really feel part of it. You're just sort of playing it, whereas I genuinely feel like I'm in the story. Because it's genius, and I can imagine it's pretty hard to keep track of and keep that going, because it's got to be just this huge web of who knows whom and when you talk to them. But it is just such a beautiful thing, and whenever it comes up on stream, people are like, "Yeah, I noticed that. I love that. That is so cool."
It does get complicated with some of our characters, but we try to make sure we hit those connective beats when we can.
But it is a bit of a magic trick. And without asking you to self-aggrandize or criticize any other games or anything like that, I wonder if you could give us, just break it down in very simple terms. Say, for example, you were hiring a great writer, but who had worked on completely different games, or an MMO that had a very different approach. What would you say to them? This is what we need you to do. This is the key to ESO's writing.
Well, I think I'd tell them first that we're a studio where story comes first. So we want that story to be compelling, interesting, to have great characters, We don't do kill the 10 rat quests. That's just not in our makeup. Not that there's anything wrong with those for certain games. That's how some of the games started. But we try to take it to the next level, and if we do that, we do something with a twist. So, go kill the 10 exploding rats, or something that makes it different and exciting. And then I'd want to make sure that writer not only understood that, played our game a little bit, got to see what they were getting into, and that they could handle that level of depth and nuance that goes into the stories that we create.
Yeah.
Right, so bring a bit of their real life experience to bear wherever possible. Give it a touch of realism.
Yeah.
Nice.
Within the fantasy element, but yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to share that story again with Wes, because it keeps coming up this week. We had Wes Johnson here on Monday, and he's just such a lovely guy. But one thing, I've talked to him a few times over the last, since Gold Road dropped, and every time we say, what's your favorite character? He says he doesn't have one because he loves all of them, but he always sort of alludes to Johannes Verlaine as being something very special for him because of his own experience with his father. And he always says, I really hope that the person responsible for writing that story, when they heard my voiceover, that they felt like I did it justice. And on Monday, he'd never actually seen it in the game, so we on stream played it. So he was watching it, and his reaction to that was, oh my goodness, his face. I'm pretty sure there were some tears. It was
tearjerker territory. Yeah.
And it's just this whole process of that starts with a story, then it's written beautifully. It's put in this quest, and players always pick up on this story as well as something that's really emotional. But it's such a short little thing, but just so much work and love went into this. And I just wanted to share that because wanted to share the back.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so in single-player Elder Scrolls games, the story takes sort of surprisingly low profile. I mean, sure, there are grand and beautiful story moments, but it's the sandbox and the setting that define those games. Does ESO return the stories and especially the characters to center stage? Do you feel like that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we want story and player agency to go hand in hand with exploring and interacting with the world. We want you to be able to experience ESO the way you want to in any of those directions. So if you want to ignore the story, you can do that with our game. But if you want to get into the story and really delve deeply, we provide plenty of ways for you to do that as well. And I think that's what makes us something for everybody, and really does take that aesthetic of the Elder Scrolls and take it to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the key ingredients in creating a compelling character, would you say?
That sometimes depends on the character. If you're doing it with humor or with drama, you want to do it a little differently for the character. But generally, we want, especially our quest bestowers, to usually be sympathetic and even likable, Narcissus Dren notwithstanding. We want them to have layers and not just be cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
Our characters should have some level of flaws and idiosyncrasies, just like real people. But we don't want to make them so complicated that it gets in the way. One or two of those touches in a short quest is more than enough to help create somebody that you want to adventure with for at least the next 30 minutes.
That makes sense. Do you approach things like dungeon or trial stories differently to sort of the big overland one? Because what I always find is that they're so sort of distilled, like really big. You go big in dungeons, and I love dungeon stories. They're like one of my favorite things. But what's the difference, sort of how they differ from the main stuff?
Yeah, so the dungeons is where we really do focus more on the multiplayer aspect. So the quests are set up differently than we do for the overland content. I oversee the dungeon writing, but I don't do a lot of it myself. Right now, my dungeon writer is Nani, Helena Walkhouse, and Julie Comstock are doing the dungeons these days, and they're doing a great job. But a lot of the dungeon storytelling is told through SATs or what we call BARCs, and environmental storytelling and things you hear in the world, as opposed to a lot of face-to-face conversations. We have some of them, but that's not the driving mechanic for storytelling in the dungeon, because everything is so frantic and hectic and moving. So we have to tell the stories in different ways, and those can get tricky at times. But as you said, I think we do a really good job with it. And some of the characters you get to interact with along the way in the dungeons are some of the most memorable characters we've created.
I agree with that. I think it's really great when the storytelling and the quest unfolding and the objectives being clarified, all of that stuff can be done as much as possible through action, through barks, like you said, and through exploration. Like you stumble across a letter and get a little more context. We were just, as Maya said, in Shipwright's Regret not 20 minutes ago, doing this exact thing. And we love that dungeon, but it's not the only example of that.
Right, a tough question. Which are the characters that you're most pleased with? Whether it's written by you or others, but, which ones are the ones that you're like, yeah, that one?
That's a hard one. It's like trying to choose between your favorite pet or your favorite kid or something like that. We've rolled out so many great characters over the course of, it's 11 years now. I'm always going to have a soft spot for the people I helped create from the beginning. Back in the day, Naryu, Darien, Rigert, Cadwell, Lyris, Abner Tharn. It was great interacting with Alfred Molina when he was doing the Abner for Elsewhere. That just came together so nicely. Poor Stibbins, soft spot for Stibbins. Verandis and Gwendis, King Korog and Evely, Vea, Valsira and Lathan, Chimera, Fenorian. Oh, who do I pick? Laramel the Wise. And then there's our villains, Athelia and Lyranth and Rada al Saran are so great characters. The Daedric Princes, and then not to mention characters other members of my team created, like Alchemy, Tunloran, Zirith, Raz, although I've written Raz too, Arox the Mutilator. I can't pick.
The list just goes on.
We could do an adjunct to that question then. A few minutes ago, Scon Indy in chat said, please ask Bill, who is his favorite god? Now, I'm assuming that refers to Aedra or Daedra.
The Aedra are so remote and not really part of the world, and I've never had to write one, so I don't really think about them a lot, except as we try to tell stories. The Daedra are very intriguing to me, and we tried our best to make them different from one another, to make Mehrunes Dagon different than Molag Bal, because they could be very similar if we didn't play them in different directions. I really like what we did with Athelia. I thought that came out really well. But just fun of writing, probably Shia Gorath or Hermaeus Mora are probably the two that have been the most fun to write.
Oh, I can definitely see that, yeah.
Now, if you take a step down, Vivek was also pretty cool to write, and so was Sothasil. I did a little bit of him. Lehman did more of Sothasil, but he's also pretty neat.
I think that's one of my favorites, yeah.
So many characters.
I know, I couldn't choose one, yeah. But
I can imagine it's a bit of a generic question, but we have to ask,
Yeah.
Okay, so we actually spoke with Becky Ignowski. That interview is coming in a couple of days, tomorrow, in fact.
Tomorrow.
But we spoke with her a few days ago. We had to pre-record that one. and that was all about the voiceover process. And she talked very interestingly about how great it is when the writers have an idea for who they want to play a particular character, and they could sort of forward that query. Might this person be interested and available? What's it like to see stories and characters that your team has worked on, that you personally have worked on for months or however long, suddenly open their mouths and start talking to you on screen?
Kind of surreal. We love the voice actors. They do a great job. We love working with them. Most of them seem to love working with us. They appreciate the way we tell and write the stories. Some of them have even said, you know, this is better than something I've gotten from another game, so that's nice to hear. But they really do help bring our words that we write and the characters we create to life. They might look good on the page, but it's not till that actor breathes life into them that they really come alive.
Yeah.
And that interestingly, when we were making King Kurog, I put a note into the with Becky that I was thinking of John Goodman when I wrote him. That kind of a voice. And we couldn't get John Goodman, but we got this, I don't remember the actor's name, but a nice gentleman, an English gentleman. But I was watching on the monitors when he came into the studio, and he was smaller than John Goodman. And I'm going, uh-oh, and he's got this nice British voice, and I'm like, uh-oh, this isn't going to work. And I explained what I was thinking, and suddenly he did this great booming voice, and I'm like, oh, he's got it, and it was perfect.
Amazing.
So yeah, we work pretty closely with Becky on we give them casting notes, we give them biographies of all of the major characters. We talk about age and how we'd like the voice to be. If there is an actor we either want to emulate or we wanted them to try to get, we give them that information. And you know, when we do the writing, we try really hard to make it easy for the voice actor to say. We don't try to write overly long, complicated sentences. We try to avoid long strings of weird made-up words, although sometimes we can't help it. And then we struggle right along with them as they try to get all those words out. And we usually sit in with our during the session with our characters to listen in, to provide background, and to answer questions if they come up, and to be there if we do have to rewrite something on the spot just because they're having trouble with the structure that we put together. That doesn't happen very often. Most of them can handle it or do handle it. But we're there in case they need any kind of help like that.
Well, I love the story about John Goodman as King Kurog, now I'm going to struggle anytime I do the Orsinium quest or anything like that, not to hear him asking me if I want to go bowling. Because I'm a huge Big Lebowski fan. That's just going to stay with me. But for what it's worth, Becky and viewers will see this in about 24 hours. She did say, if anyone from the writing team is watching, please do this more often. You know, come at me with your ideas of who you want to play this character. Because she said it was incredibly useful, even if that person wasn't actually available. So yeah, that is a really interesting insight. The fact that you guys can look that far ahead. How much involvement and influence do you get in the look of the character, looking at towards the art department now? Because that is also a huge thing. The look of these guys, the silhouette they have on screen.
Right. So we certainly work with the art department for all the big concepts that they do, whether it's characters or environmental pieces that they're building for us. Actually, our lore master, Michael Zinke, does a lot of that interplay with them to make sure that everything is working for lore and the aesthetics of the world from our point of view as well as from their point of view. As for characters, we'll settle on what species we're using, what age we want the character to be, young, middle age, old. Do we want them to look rich or poor? Do we want them to look like a warrior or a scholar? Sometimes we'll decide we need somebody with an eye patch or a beard because that's the character we're writing about, and they're going to talk about that. So we're involved, and we get to, as a team, come to a consensus on what that thing will finally look like when it's all put together.
That's cool.
I have to say, what I've loved sort of finding out, how the game is made. Basically, it's really fascinating, sort of thinking about all the processes. But the one terrifying thing that keeps coming up every day is that it actually does come together, because there is so much. Every department has to sort of come together, and from someone who's never worked, in the gaming industry, it's incredible. Really is.
I like to say that we are the most proficient AAA studio ever created, I think. I mean, we have released the equivalent of 11 or 12 single-player games in 11 years. That's unheard of.
It is an enormous
It is
amount,
what we talked about, I want to say, with Rich on day one, literally just saying that obviously, because it is an MMO, it's one game. But because of all the additions every single year, there is massive new stuff, and you guys keep giving yourself more and more things to do, which obviously we love it. But yeah, it's and it is very, very, very appreciated. But yeah, it's I'm really enjoying finding out just how much labor goes into this. It just makes me appreciate it even more. And obviously we're already fans, but yeah. So coming back to the idea that ESO is a story-rich MMO, some people might say that's an oxymoron, but you guys have proven that that's not really true. But is it fair to say that the MMO format does put constraints on the storytelling you can do and limit some possibilities?
Maybe. I mean, every type of content has some kind of constraint, whether it's constraints by the lore, constraints by the format, constraints by the type of stories that you want to tell in your world. But as you noted earlier, we've broken the mold with MMO storytelling, and we've kind of created it or turned it into something much richer and deeper than was seen before, with a couple of exceptions, right? So in general, our limits really tend to focus more toward the lore and the world of Elder Scrolls than the limitations, and I guess some limitations of our tool, like there's only so many things we can really build in the game, or so many ways we can roll out a quest in the game. But we've been doing it now for so long that doesn't get in the way. We just know the lane we can swim in, and we try to push that boundary all the time, but we kind of know how to get through that lane so that we can get that stuff out on time.
Reminds me of a conversation I had with CJ Greb, the art director, about this. He gave a very similar answer, that the constraints are massive, but they often lead us to do better work.
So
yeah, I mean, we know the pieces we have to play with, and we know how to play with them, so it usually turns out pretty good. So
yeah, so what would you say is the biggest constraint for you?
I guess at this point in the life of the game, there's two constraints that I struggle with as we come up with the next batch of stories, and those tend to be toward where in the world can we go next to tell our next set of stories,
right?
And how can we push our engine to try some new and intriguing things in new and different ways. And then, we're always looking to break fresh ground and cover topics that we haven't dealt with before. And that gets harder after, like I said, 12 or 14 releases of multiple quests over 11 years. We've done a lot of stuff, so trying to find new ways and new things that we haven't done before, it can get tricky.
Is it going to help that the studio's moving away from this sort of formulaic sounds like a criticism, but you know what I mean. You know, the chapter format with the dungeon DLC, the smaller DLC, and the big chapter. Is that going to help you guys with those constraints and give you more freedom going forward, do you think?
I think it's too early to answer that question. We're just
Right.
beginning to figure out what all of that actually means. It certainly opens up new opportunities, but we're still trying to figure out what do releases look like in this new Elder Scrolls Online world. And we've only got the first couple of them in the pipeline, so it's kind of like being back in the beginning at the old days of trying to figure out what we were doing.
I love that. So are there certain types of story that you just can't do in a game like this?
I'm not sure there's stories we can't do. There's certain stories we won't do, whether it's because they don't fit the lore,
Yeah.
or they break some of our rules of morality or something like that in some way. But there's usually a way to spin a story if we think it's worth telling, that we can find a way to tell it in ESO. I mean, we've told stories that have leaned into different genres. We've done horror, we've done humor, we've done thrillers, we've done mysteries, we've done ghost stories and murder mysteries. So they always work if we can center them firmly in our medieval fantasy mindset, and then make sure that the goals and the enemies make sense in our world. If all that comes together, we can tell almost any story we can imagine. But yeah, beyond that, it's more what we won't do, such as I said, the simple kill 10 rats quest, quests that are too anachronistic or too pop culture-y. We don't do that. And there's definitely sacred cows in the lore that we won't break. Like, we're never going to do the story that brings the dwarves back, or even tell you what actually happened to them. We might give you a theory, somebody's theory, but we will never definitively answer those kind of questions. So that's more where we try to avoid, as opposed to, there's no big list of you cannot do this in Elder Scrolls, except a couple of those lore things like the dwarves, right?
Yeah.
You must have a list somewhere of things that Todd has said. No.
But yeah, I do love that, finding a way of telling a story that works in ESO, because sometimes, like, when a new release is coming up and we see the trailer, I think, how is that going to work? And it does. But it is different, but it does work.
Yeah. And that's the goal, to surprise both ourselves and the audience, right?
Yeah, it's amazing and it's actually way too rare, in my opinion, that custodians of a particular franchise, especially a beloved franchise, when they have the guts to say, all right, this intellectual property that we have is a place. It's not limited to a type of story or a type of movie or a genre. Let's play around and make sure that it works, just as you said, but to do horror, thriller, comedy, romance even, and all have it take place in the same world. It works in the real world. Why can't it work in a franchise setting? And all too often you get the same type of story told over and over again, and you guys have resisted that. The only example I can think of is the Daedric threat, the cosmic threat that tends to rear its head, but that's a little bit like criticizing Star Wars for having too many stories about the Jedi, right? It's sort of bound to happen. But you have done these ones like Hrothgar, the Daedra barely even feature. And I love it that you're able to do that.
Cool.
So we already touched on this, but I wanted to ask about more about the constraints of writing for an MMO, and sort of the show don't tell, Maxime, that you hear talked about a lot in movie script writing. That's much harder for video games to do, I think, and especially for an MMO which doesn't have access to the performance capture and all of the fancy toys that you might have if you are working with an engine which is brand new and completely new tech and everything, rather than the the very obvious limitations that MMOs are working with. Do you ever feel like, for one thing, it's got to be gratifying and sort of a miracle that you can tell these stories, given the straitjacket that the format sometimes represents. But do you do you ever think, I just want to go and write another novel instead? Because we know you've done that in the past.
I mean, I dabble with things on the side, and someday they'll see the light of day when I'm no longer working here. But no, I mean, I'll keep doing this as long as it's exciting to me and interesting to me, and it still is, right? Every year we come up with the next story or the next set of stories, and they capture my imagination and make it fresh, and as long as that keeps happening, I'll keep doing it because
That's
it's
awesome
fun.
to hear. Yeah, that's a delight to hear. I hope that applies to everyone on the team. It seems to. Like, one of the things, like Maya said, that keeps coming up is how long a lot of you guys have been working at the same company on the same project.
Yeah, Rich just
Yeah,
got
I
his
mean,
20-year medal, didn't he?
he did. Yeah, it's unheard of. I mean, I avoided the computer industry for so long because it was work at one place for 2 years, lose your job, start somewhere else. When I gave the chance to ZeniMax Studios, online studios, they had said that at least through their Bethesda, they were still pretty new at the time, but through Bethesda, they, people stick around for a long time. And I said, all right, well, let's see how this goes. And here I am, 12, 13 years later, right? So.
Yeah, that's great. That's an aspect that I hadn't really appreciated until we started this series of interviews, but now it seems obvious. Why didn't I think of that before? But going back to the lore. Elder Scrolls lore, as you already alluded to, it's very deep, it's very complicated, it's also diegetic. We talked about this with Michael Zenke, and keep in mind that he may watch this interview at some point. He may be here right now, who knows? How important is it to have a lore master, and how difficult is it for the writers to stay inside the lines?
I think it's the lore master role has served us very well over the years, from Lawrence to Lehman and now to Michael. It not only helps the writing team, but it's an important resource to art, marketing, and most of the other departments in the company, in the studio. We didn't call it that, but in ways I was the Star Wars lore master back in my West End day and part of my Wizards days when we had the Star Wars role-playing game, and when I wrote the guide to the Star Wars universe. So I was familiar with that kind of a role when I got here, and it just made sense to me to have that for a property that's got so much history and continuity to keep track of and to deal with. The lore master helps with that. Their role is to be a resource, not to say no, but to say, how can I help you find a solution to what you want to do? And I think that works really well. Michael fills that spot. I'll help with certain things, especially when they start to rise to the top, like for the main stories and things like that. But in general, he takes care of that on a day-to-day basis for me, and that's just it just really helps both the team and the greater studio at large.
He's a delight to talk to. He really was.
He is. He's delightful. When I first got to the company, he was already on the team, so he's the guy who trained me how to write in our tool and all of that. So, and then he left to go out to other pastures, and then I brought him back a few years later. So it's been fun.
Get back here.
Yeah.
And how often, you could probably count on one hand, I don't know, but I'm always curious to ask, because especially in the early days, Rich talks about this happening. How many times over the years do you think you guys have had to contact Bethesda Game Studios about an event or a character that's being depicted? I'm thinking of Thelia, for example. How many times has that happened?
Well, Bethesda is basically the owners of the license, and we're kind of licensing it from them. So they approve our big stories for the year. They don't go through everything we're doing, but the big story we get that approved. At least this is the way it worked in the past. We have to see what the model is moving forward, but we would give them a short description that I would write of the overall plot and characters, and they would give us feedback and approve or work with us to get to a place where they would approve it. Excuse me.
Let's see.
With Athelia, that was a tricky one, creating a new prince, obviously. But we were able to pull it off because we were going to make them. They were a forgotten prince that were going to be forgotten again after the story was over. So we figured out how to do that and still introduce a new prince into the lore.
So actually, it sounds like it happens more often than I realized.
I mean, it's not a lot of communication, and at least in the past, Rich handled that mostly for us.
Sure.
We would have conversations with them on a less frequent basis, but it was, like I said, for the chapters, they would approve this chapter story every year.
So every year at least. That's really interesting, because I've got to say, I've said this before, I'm on the record with this. I think you guys, and it is obviously a team effort and a very, very long effort, have done a huge service to the franchise of single-player games, just because of the amount of lore and world building that has been done by ZOS. I think it's easy to miss for players who just are enjoying the game, they're loving the game, and they're not thinking about what Elder Scrolls 6 can contain and refer back to, and all of these things. Like, if we ever get to visit Cloudrest in a single-player game, so much fascinating stage setting has already been done. So that's like credit that you guys aren't even getting yet, probably, but presumably will down the line if we ever get any more games in the single-player series.
We don't know any more about the next Elder Scrolls single-player game than you guys do, so it'll be a surprise.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's an absolute wealth of world building that you guys have done. It's almost incalculable. We'd be here for hours if we tried to list all of the things that have been fleshed out and realized that were only vaguely alluded to or didn't even exist before you got your hands on it.
Right. As you have alluded to, I mean, while we're both working in the same world, we do approach our stories differently than they do. It would be, I'd like to see that they take a little bit of what we've done and developed and utilize it, but I don't know. We'll see what happens.
They better do. Otherwise they'll get letters.
All right, so aside from writing, what else do you think ESO has or does that's special?
So many things. Our community, that's special. You guys are great.
Hey!
I don't do as much of this sort of thing as Rich or Finn, but for example, when I got to go to Amsterdam last summer, that was an amazing experience, getting to meet and talk with all of you, all the fans. Just spectacular. Such a nice, warm, friendly group that you don't see in a lot of fandoms, which is a nice. We're honored that that's true for us. Beyond that, I think the fact that ESO can be so many different things to so many different people is one of its is the strength that I like to point to. You can actually approach the game and make it your own unique experience, and I think that's its underlying strength. Whether you want to run around and explore the world and ignore the quests, or you want to just do dungeons, or you want to run around in PvP and become Emperor. There's so many different ways to approach the game, and you can do one thing one day and another thing the next day, and never do the same thing twice. That's just, I think that's its strength.
Yeah, I think the number of people who don't double dip or triple dip into multiple activities is actually pretty low. I'm sure there are some people who just do dungeons and trials and that's it. I mean, I know some of them, That's definitely it. But most of us do everything that we can. So
Well,
yeah,
that's good to hear, but we build it so that you can play your way, and we really mean that. Do it the way you want.
And
So,
I love just how much there is to do. And even if perhaps, I don't know, fishing or playing cards isn't your thing, well, there's hundreds of other things you can do. And I love the people who absolutely love their fishing and cards. Well, it's there for them as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I've never played Tales of Tribute, not because I avoided it or I don't want to, but simply because there are so many other things, and they are a little higher on the list for me. So yeah, I guess and I've sunk a terrifying number of hours into this game. So the fact that there is still that much, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
yeah. My Steam hours played in ESO are terrifying, but yeah. But you mentioned obviously community. I mean, that's why we're doing events like these. This game really became so important to so many people during lockdown because, and it just stayed that way, even beyond lockdown. But that is why we sort of started running events and things and realized, blimey, this is awesome. And we haven't left. And obviously lots of other people haven't. So yes, thank you.
thank you.
Right. So we are conducting a poll. So who would be your choice to finally win the 3 Banners War?
Well, that's another hard one. I've written all 3 of our rulers over the years, and I
it.
love them. I love them all for different things. I have a slightly more soft spot for King Yurun and the Ebonheart Pact, since I think those were the first 2 zones I worked on, and they were very formative for me. That's where Nariu showed up, and Rigert. But I do love High King Emmerich's snark and
Yes.
Queen Erin's adventurous attitude. I see her as the bad kid who went off to do what her parents didn't want, went on adventures, and then came back and found herself in charge of the kingdom. I guess if I had to choose, I lean slightly in favor of the pact, though I'm not sure Yurun would make the best emperor.
I love that.
While we're on that subject, this is maybe a little bit tinfoil hat, but is there a reason why his son, Prince Ernskar, seems to me to be taking increasingly front row position in a lot of the story and a lot of the historical events that are unfolding in this game, whereas we don't see that with the other rulers? Is that just my imagination, or is there an actual reason for that?
When we did Western Skyrim, we wanted to bring some level of the eastern half of the kingdom into the story, and for that package, the actor who plays Yurun was not available.
Right.
So we went with Ernskar because we also knew that Ernskar, I think there's a lore book or something that says that he was going to be the king and marry someone from the west. So we got him and connected him up with the daughter. What was her name? I forget her name.
Yeah.
Too many characters. So that's where Ernskar came in. And when we did the High Altu, he was also not available. But we were able to get back, at least briefly, High King Emmerich and Queen Erin. So we'll see if we can get Yurun back at some point. But sometimes you just got to play around with the actors that are available.
Yeah, I honestly, I'd always assumed it was something like that. I also love Peter Stormare, not just because he's a Scandinavian like me, but like I said, big Lebowski fan, and Vivant Zamani Lebowski. Yeah.
All right. So we had Brian Wheeler with us yesterday talking PvP, and we're asking everyone to give us a question for the next person, ideally something fun and cheeky. So Brian Wheeler's question to you is, how much does he drive you crazy by sneaking lots of Easter eggs into Ciro?
He mostly drives me crazy because if he gets to tell us that he's written stuff that we have to edit and we have to go find it, that's how he drives me crazy. Um, the Easter eggs are great. I mean, we try to put Easter eggs wherever we can. I mean, that's part of the fun of dealing with a franchise such as this, dropping little hints in wherever we can that makes sense and don't look like we're just doing it to be cute, right? So if he does that, I'll remove them or I'll rewrite them so that they're better. But it's all fun and games, and we have those little challenges amongst ourselves, and that's part of what keeps us on our toes every day in the office.
I have to ask, since we're talking about Easter eggs, we went with a group just a couple of weeks ago to pick up leads for one of the new mythics, Rakat's Void Mantle, very, very useful thing. And when we were in the Necropolis, Rimmon Necropolis public dungeon, we stumbled across almost literally, I think it's a boss encounter with multiple characters, and one of the Khajiit is called Zabiden Joe. That's got to be a Joe Biden reference, right? Or is that a complete coincidence? Or do you not remember?
I'll have to look at that. It's either a coincidence or another one of those things somebody snuck by that we have to fix, because that's not the way we do. We're not supposed to do this.
Oh no! Well, I hope I didn't get anyone in trouble. But we laughed a lot about that because it was so incredibly random, and it seemed like it could be deliberate or coincidental. We didn't know how to take it, but it was very funny. Are there any other Easter eggs which you don't think are very well known that maybe you wouldn't mind telling us about?
I mean, early on, I would put a hint for what was coming next somewhere at the end of the previous quests. Somebody might say, "Oh, I can't wait to go to High Rock next," or something like that. Those are always fun to do, and to see if Rich noticed that I was giving away trade secrets before I was supposed to. But I always like to do it in a way that it's naturally part of the story and makes sense.
Yeah.
At the moment, I am so into wrapping up the VO, we call it VO lock because it's getting all of the words ready for the script before we finish this next package, that I can't think past where I'm currently working. So I'm not going to be able to come up with anything cool. Sorry about that.
No. I know there are is it Brian's dog in Cyrodiil, and I want to say Rich's as well? Those are so fun, cute.
Yeah, I mean, we've done things for people who, well-known players that have passed. We've given them nice memorials, if you would.
The bear in Cyrodiil.
So we do some things like that. But in general, we do try to avoid the very pop culture-y thing, And not that there's anything wrong with it for their kind of game, but we would never do the blatant Indiana Jones ripoff that WoW did years ago, right? That's not the kind of thing we do. Instead, I made Narcissus Dren, who is, he's named after a place like Indiana Jones, Narcissus Dren, with a common last name, but he's a very different adventurer archaeologist than Indiana Jones, and that's how we like to do those kind of things.
Yeah, I like that. Well, not tomorrow, but the day after that, we're going to have, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this name, and I feel very bad, LCI Yorochi, the senior system designer. And do you have any question for her that we can ask?
Good question.
Something a little bit cheeky or funny, if you can. Like Wheeler's question to you.
Right. So systems likes to do things like the new scribing stuff and the new cross-class or subclass mechanics.
Yeah.
I could ask you to ask what's next for systems, but they wouldn't be allowed to answer it. Maybe ask them that anyway and see how they react.
I love that.
Bill Slavicsek orders you to tell chat what's coming next.
Just on pronunciations, it's Slavicsek.
Okay. Slavicsek, my apologies.
No. Just since you brought it up, I figured I'd just say the way my name actually should be said. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we care a lot about that. So absolutely, I'm surprised I got that wrong. Honestly, it may be because my here is Czech, so my my sort of understanding of any Slavic pronunciation skews in that direction.
Oh, all good. And it's been mangled worse than that over the years.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. I mean, with that, we are out of time, so we don't want to hold you up, but we're so grateful for your time. It's just seeing chat. Everybody's like, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Love it. Love the story. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your incredible work. And just thank you.
Hero status surpassed. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. And this was a wonderful event for our 10-year anniversary. And thank you for doing it.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun for us. So thank you for hopping in.
Sure. All right. Bye now, everybody.
All the best.
Thank you. Bye. We'll be right back.